Hey guys, I am actually back to do a romance novel review. However, this is not an ARC review. Now, should it have been? Yes. I did get an ARC of the book that I'm about to talk about, but I was not able to read it as an ARC. And the thing about this author is that I love them so much. And so I knew that I was always going to go back and read this book, and I wasn't sure if I was then going to make a review about it, but I have to talk about this because I have to. And so I also don't have an ARC this week. So I get to talk about whatever I want, and it's this, and I don't even know how I'm going to do this, because I'm going to try to keep this spoiler free, but we'll get there. So the book that I am reviewing today is Swept Away by Beth O'Leary. I have reviewed a number of Beth's books on the channel before, including, I think the last one I read was The Wake Up Call, which, and if I have the links, I'll put them up above, but The Wake Up Call was just like an adorable, cutesy little book. Very, I think, different from what I normally read Beth O'Leary for. For a lot of people, their first introduction to her writing, it often comes from something called The Flat Chair. And in that book, it's two people who are sharing a flat, and they each get it for 12 hours a day, and they like leave each other post-it notes because they never see each other. They fall in love through post-it notes. It's amazing. The Wake Up Call was more cutesy, about two people who are working in a hotel. And the thing about Swept Away for me that really made me interested in this book is that this is the story of Lexi and Zeke. Lexi and Zeke meet at a bar near a wharf, and they both basically break some of their own personal rules because they just kind of feel a connection, and they decide to have a one-night stand. One of the interesting things with Lexi and Zeke is that this is one of the few scenarios you don't often see this, where Zeke is in his 20s. He's actually 8 years younger than Lexi, who is in her early 30s. They both have various reasons for having an emotional kind of night where they decide to have this one night stand, and they go back to a houseboat where they have their one night stand. The sex is amazing. It's life-changing. But when they wake up, they find that the houseboat became unmoored during the night, and they have drifted out to sea with no fuel, so they cannot get back to shore. I loved the concept of a romance novel that took place primarily, like, this is like way beyond there's only one bed, right? There is literally nowhere for Zeke and Lexi to go because they are trapped on this boat together in the middle of the ocean. That really spoke to me as one of my, and probably still my favorite, Beth O'Leary book of all time was called The Road Trip, which was very similar. It was two exes, this was a second chance romance, who were driving to the wedding of a mutual friend in the same car. And so they had a little bit more wiggle room. They had cell service, but they were, again, literally trapped in the car with them and their baggage. And in this case, there is Lexi and Zeke in a boat with their baggage. The difference being that they had not met prior to their one night stand. And so they're on a boat with a stranger, essentially. I loved this story from the beginning. There's this moment where Lexi has like this incredible moment of realizing, like, oh my God, like, I don't know this person. She's going through some of the stuff that's on the boat. One of the important things about the boat, and this is not a spoiler, is that Lexi thinks it belongs to her friend Penny, not realizing that Penny has recently sold the boat to Zeke. And the boat was actually Zeke's father's originally, and Zeke sold it after he died and then came to buy it back for emotional reasons. And so both of them have like a random amount of personal stuff on the boat because they didn't realize the other person had bought and or was trying to stay there. So like Lexi had filled the whole boat up with food, and Zeke had come in from London, and so he had brought like a suitcase and stuff. Zeke, it turns out, is a chef. Lexi does not know this. Again, she's never met this man before, and the night prior they were not really doing much talking. And so she just like finds a set of knives and she starts freaking out, and she's like, oh my God, maybe we're not actually trapped here. Maybe this is like a very elaborate ploy for a man to like hurt me. And you know, she goes and confronts Zeke about that, and rather than Zeke being like, how dare like you think that, or like that's so stupid, like Zeke has this moment where he's like, oh, Zeke kind of understands where she's coming from, and instead of like calling her crazy or, you know, trying to like poo-poo her, you know, a fright or something, he's like, I'm really sorry. I can see how you can draw that conclusion. Let me explain it to you. If you want, you can keep the knives if you feel safer. Like, I'm so sorry that I made you feel unsafe. And I just really liked the like dynamic of Lexi's first reaction is like, as a woman, obviously this is a very real fear that she should have, but also like Lexi in this dynamic is the one who's like, I'm gonna take the knife, I'm gonna blah, blah, blah. And Zeke is the more like connected to his feelings, like, I can see how you might think that. Let's talk it out. And that dynamic kind of continues also, again, playing on this idea of like, he's younger and she's older, but they've had different things happen in their lives, and they are, you know, 8 years apart, but they are at similar stages in certain ways, like developmentally and where they are in their lives. I really enjoyed it. I think it played off of a lot of interesting character tropes and just gave each character a lot of little interesting facets that played into the other characters really well. Because without that, this book wouldn't have worked. If the characters were not multifaceted and interesting, and we wanted to hear them talk to each other and interact in ways that weren't just like flirty, right? Because they realize that there's not zero chance they're gonna die out at sea, right? So they're not really spending like a ton of time bantering. So it's like a very complicated situation that Beth O'Leary has written these characters into, and I just loved them so much. Had the book stayed on that high, I would probably have a 4.5, 5-star review of this book, because I just really enjoyed the characters a lot. There's a whole side plot with saving Eugene the seagull, and at one point they like find an abandoned oil rig, and Zeke says they need to like take a day off of panicking, and he like arranges a date. There was like some really cute scenes in between, like really wonderful character interaction. But then we get to the third act of this book, and to this moment, I waited to do this review to try to think about it and see where I felt, and literally like, I have to make this review or it will never go up. But I genuinely don't know how to describe what happened to my feelings about this book once we hit the third act. Now, as we all know, generally in a romance novel, the third act, the 75% of the way in, there has to be some sort of breakup or some sort of tension, right, that like forces our lovers apart. And so it's like dramatic, so they can like come back together to have a reunion at the end. Now, I have seen romance novels that very successfully do not use this trope, because sometimes it gets forced into a romance novel where I feel it shouldn't be, because it's not natural to the characters, it's not natural to their arc, and it just causes like almost like the author to like come down like God and be like, okay, natural disaster has to happen to rip the two of you apart. And I don't know if it's because we're so used to it happening, if there's this idea that it has to happen, but I hate when it happens and it feels so unnatural. And that's what happened here. Now, I'm not going to tell you what caused the third act breakup. It is a spoiler of massive proportions. And it really cannot be explained without seeing some of the things we find out about the characters and their journey, which is like smaller spoilers for some of the subplot. So I'm not spoiling it. What I will say is that if Beth O'Leary felt so compelled to have Lexi and Zeke pulled apart for some reason, in the third act of this story. There were far better ways to do it that made way more sense for these characters. One of the things that we know about Lexi, for example, is that she is always putting others first. She doesn't know how to choose things for herself and put herself first, really, is maybe a better way. And so one of the things that makes her fall in love with Zeke is that he's just really confused, and he's like, yeah, you should definitely be cherished, and that is just like a foreign language to her. She has put her entire life into taking care of her friend Penny, and Penny is a single mom, and she's been helping to raise her daughter May. And Lexi has a deep, deep love for this child. She's basically raised her, but at the same time, she has put anything that has happened in her life on hold to help Penny and May, whether it's like, giving them money, living in the house with them, that type of thing. And I would understand if it was really, really hard for her to trust that a relationship grown essentially out of trauma on this boat was going to be real and something that she could stake her life on when, she feels really needed by Penny and May, for example. That would have made a lot of sense to me. Zeke, on the other hand, while Lexi makes herself be needed all the time, Zeke has an opinion of himself that he is useless and worthless, and no one in his family has really needed him around, that he's the family screw up. And so he's like really seeking to, again, find his place in the world. And kind of in the same way, I could have seen something out of Zeke where he's like, she only wanted to be with me in this situation because she needed me. And now we're back in the real world, and I can't play, her savior or her hero or be the only person in her life anymore. And because she has all of these important relationships, maybe I'm not enough, and to have some kind of issue with that. The reason that they break up has nothing to do with their characters, basically, whatsoever. And it really, really upset me, especially because the nature of what that twist was and what that meant, and oh god, it felt so wrong plot-wise. I'm a big proponent of the idea that if a book doesn't stick a landing, it is really hard to give it a good rating, because even if 2/3 of the book were incredible, as I think that they are, a lot of that ends up being undercut by the ending. I know some people don't feel the same way, and they're like, well, as long as most of the book was good, like if it had an unsatisfying ending that's like not as big of a deal, you're gonna have to decide for yourself how you feel about this, because I'm still really torn, because I loved the majority of this book. And it is kind of wild to me how one decision kind of just changed my entire feelings towards it. Now, will I still read everything Beth O'Leary ever publishes ever, as I have been? Yes, because Beth O'Leary has a long track record of books that I have loved and adored, and a way of writing her characters in particularly and their stories that are always multifaceted and interesting, and these very, very emotional stories, all of which, again, is in this book. The plotting choices that were made, I don't understand. I don't like it, and that's why I felt so compelled to make this review of this book, even though it's a little bit older at this point, in the sense that I'm usually reviewing arcs, because I have so many feelings, I could not contain them. If you have read this book already, please leave a comment down below about what you thought about that third act, because maybe you can, if you liked it, and you can explain it in a way that makes it make more sense to me. Obviously, just for the sake of anyone who hasn't read the book, hide anything you talk about in the ending under like spoilers, hit that enter button so it gets hidden under the more tab. But I would love to hear other people's opinions, because I've seen some wildly different comments about this in some of the reviewing sites, and personally I'm still just really on the fence about how I feel about it. But I am kind of psyched that I have some room in my schedule to go back and hit some other romance novels that I may have missed because I was reading some arcs. I will also take recommendations for other books like Beth O'Leary that you think I should read in the comments. And otherwise, we'll see what happens next Monday, because I don't know. This is just gonna be content chaos and I'm here for it. Thanks, guys. Bye.